Thank you for always reminding me of that, Rich. Okay, so when you get to this point in the process, you have to decide on your exit strategy. Now, because of Sheila's been working, we have made that decision, and it's going to be an assignment of the contract. But when we called this meeting, we weren't sure, and so that's why I wanted to have it quickly, because in case we needed to make decisions. But they're essentially, I still want to go over it, because when you guys are on your own, you get your deal and you get a buyer, you're going to have to make this decision, and I want to teach you how to make it. But I also want to tell you that if you're having trouble or don't remember, or you can go back and watch the video, but you can also call your closing attorney and say, here's what I got, what do I do? Okay, so don't like panic. There will always be someone to help you. But for your purposes in making this decision, I'm going to do a little screen share here. You basically have, oh crap, I wanted to start on that. This is from a different presentation that I did, but I just wanted to use this one slide here. All right, so gosh dang it. So there's basically 3 ways you have to go about this. The easiest, fastest, simplest, and cheapest is this first one, is what we're doing, assign your contract, okay? In order to be able to sign your contract, you have to have both the seller and the buyer know what you're doing and be aware of your fee, okay? How do you do this? Number one, when you get your buyer, you send them the assignment contract. It is posted in the documents. If you want to see it, it will always be there for you to download, take, and use. It simply says that for X amount of dollars, I assign all my rights under this contract to you, Mrs. Buyer. And what you do is you attach a copy of your contract to that, because of course your buyer is going to need to know what they are, what contract they're agreeing to take on all the obligations of the contract. So they're going to want to see it. So you send them an assignment contract, and when they sign it, or before, they might want to see it before they sign it, you send them a copy of the contract. Now, at that point, your buyer will be actually performing with your seller. So when we do this closing, our buyer is going to be buying from the seller. On that, we won't be ever taking title. On that settlement statement, we will be paid an assignment fee at closing by the closing attorney. When the deal gets sent to whoever the closing attorney is going to be, they will get a copy of the original contract and the assignment contract, and they will prepare the settlement statement accordingly. Again, fast, simple, easy, cheap. There's no additional fees on the part of the wholesaler. They just a line item and get paid at closing. So if it's possible to do it this way, that's always going to be your best bet. But it's not always possible. I have literally had clients who had a wholesale deal where they were making so much money, they didn't want to disclose it. You may come across one of those. So then you have another choice to make. If you cannot assign the contract, you have to do a double close. There's 2 ways to do a double close. A double close means you are actually going to buy the property. In this case, if we couldn't tell the buyer and seller what we were doing, Tria would buy the property. On the same day, we would turn around and sell it to our buyer. Now, again, there's 2 ways to do that, and I'm going to give them to you from I think, I don't really know which one of these is cheaper, actually. But the first way is that you actually have to borrow funds. And there are lenders out there who do only this. They'll lend you funds. It's I don't really know what the fees are. They're all different. It's usually a % of the loan amount. They know that they're only loaning the funds for 1 day. They're going into the attorney's trust account and coming right back to them the next day. That's called bridge funds. And there are definitely people out there who are loaning you those funds. So the way that works is you would get that loan. You would go to your closing attorney, actually have a closing, sign loan documents, buy the property. It gets recorded. And then an hour later or 10 minutes later or whatever, you turn around and sell it to your buyer. It's very safe for your lender. So it's kind of a gravy train. I think that's probably the more expensive way. So in our case, if we had done that, we're making very little profit. We've got a $5,000 profit. If we would have had to borrow bridge funds, that would, well, I don't remember what the usual percent is, but let's say we had to borrow $40,000. Let's say it was 3%. That's $1,200. So that's a big chunk of our profit right there. So that's the least favorable one. Then the other way is you actually create a loan from your buyer to you. So in this case, at the very least, your buyer does not have to know how much you're making, but they do have to know that you are using their money to buy the property and then sell it to them. The way this works is at closing, your closing attorney will create a promissory note, which you will sign, and you'll say, let's use this case as an example. We would have a promissory note from TRIA LLC to our buyer, and the amount of that promissory note would be $30,000. Okay. So we'd go ahead and close and purchase the property. And then the closing attorney would already have our buyer's money in their trust account. So they would use that to fund the loan to us. So they go ahead and record the deal, fund it. Then you turn around again 10 minutes, an hour later, and close your with your buyer. At that time, you quote unquote pay off your promissory note. So your buyer owes you, in our case, $40,000. You owe your buyer 30. Am I mixing up? Sorry. You owe your buyer $40,000. Your buyer owes you $45,000. So you go ahead and have your closing. You would quote pay off their loan to pay them back $40,000, and then the $5,000 would come to you. Does that make sense? Everybody understand it? Questions?
I didn't get that one.
Okay, so this is you create a loan from your buyer to you. So in our case, we have a buyer, and we'd say to that buyer, we're using your funds to buy this. So you would sign a promissory note in favor of your buyer for the amount you need to buy it. All right, well, let me back up a step. Before closing, your buyer will already have wired their funds to the closing attorney because that's required in advance. So now your closing attorney has $45,000, probably a little more than that, because whatever their closing costs are. But let's just say your closing attorney has $45,000 in the trust account for the closing. Now, but now you need to buy it first, but you don't have the money. So you borrow the money from your buyer. You give them a promissory note for the amount you need to buy it, which is how much?
$40,000.
Correct. So you do a promissory note for $40,000. Now, your closing attorney takes the $40,000 that your buyer has deposited because they've now loaned that to you. They pay the seller. Then they record the deed. So now you own the property. Or in this case, TRIA owns the property. Okay, now you turn around and have your closing with your buyer. You own the property. How much does your buyer owe you at closing?
$5,000.
$5,000.
No, total. Well, yeah, you're right, but
45.
45,000, right. And then how much do you owe your buyer back?
5,000 out of that.
Nope. How much did you borrow to buy the house?
40.
Right.
40.
So your
Oh.
buyer owes you 45, you owe them 40. So at the closing attorney takes the money that was used as your loan, and that repays your loan to your buyer, and then they owe you 45. So now they only owe you 5.
Okay.
Is that clear now?
So you don't have any closing costs with that?
No, you do. I'm leaving the closing costs out of it to be simple.
Oh, okay.
So here's about how much each of these things cost. This first one costs nothing. The way we're doing it costs us nothing. We have no closing fees. The second one, if you have to get bridge funds, we already talked about that. It depends on the percent, but let's assume 3%. That's cost you $1,200 in our case. on this third one, the only thing you do have your closing costs, because there's two closings. So let's say that's $450. And then you're gonna have an extra couple $100 for having to draft these promissory note and deed of trust. So let's say it probably costs you, I don't know, $600 to $800 on that for everything, closing costs and drafting the seller documents. Because you do have closing costs, because you're buying it, then you're selling it.
So why would somebody do that?
Because can anyone answer that? Why would you do that? Why would you do it one of these last two ways?
You don't want them to know how much you're making.
Exactly. If Sheila, if your seller was, there are some new rules now about wholesaling, which we will go over in our next meeting, okay? But putting those aside for a moment, let's say that you don't want them to know what you're making. Let's say we were making 50,000 on this deal instead of 5, and you said, man, I don't think they're going to be cool with that. And you would choose one of these last two options. You're never going to choose one of these two unless you have to. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And then how you choose between these two, always doing the loan from your end buyer is going to be most favorable to you. But if you can't get your end buyer comfortable with the fact that you're going to use their money to buy the property before you sell it to them, then you have to go with bridge funds.
Okay.
Okay, so is everyone pretty clear on why you would choose which of these?
So how would you know whether or not they would be comfortable with it or not?
How did you know in our case?
I told them. I told them both.
Yeah. Now let's pretend, Sheila, that we were making $50,000.
Okay.
How would you have felt about that? Telling them.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't want to disclose that.
So like I say, with some of these new closing regulations, there are things you have to tell the seller anyway. I'm going to save that till next meeting, but basically I think you just answered your own question. Always do the assignment if you can. If you just have any reason that they are not cool with it, then you're going to go one of these other two routes. Make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And again, no fees to do it the way we're doing it. We are just getting our $5,000 full stop. We're not in the closing. Under each of these two ways, you're going to have fees. On this double close, you're going to have not only, on the bridge fund, you're going to have your $1,200 that costs you to borrow the money. And then you're still going to have closing costs of, let's say, another $450. Okay. And then if you can do it, the loan from your buyer, that's going to be probably a total of more like $800 with closing cost and to create the documents.
Okay.
So in order from most favorable to least favorable, number 1, do an assignment. Number 2, do a promissory note to your buyer. And number 3, get a bridge loan from a hard money lender. That's in order of most favorable to least favorable. Now, that's all I really wanted to go over tonight. And like I said, when I planned this, I didn't know if we would know by then that we had an exit strategy. As it turns out, we do. As it turns out, we got the most favorable one. So yay, Sheila, for that. But do you want to update us on anything? Did she sign the assignment contract? You're muted. Oh, there you go.
Okay. Yes, today I got a call from lawyer Phillips down in Kenansville, which is her attorney.
Okay.
And he was so confused on what she was trying to tell him. Like she didn't have a clue with what to do with the assignment contract. She didn't know what to do with it, didn't know what it was. She didn't know how to proceed. So he called me, he was confused on what actually is happening. And what
By
is
the
it
way,
that she's
let
trying
me
to do?
interrupt you for 1 minute, Sheila, before
Okay.
you go on. This is a very good example here of a reason to insist that your buyer use your closing attorney. Because you will find a lot of attorneys don't understand it. Some you can educate, some you can't. We're about to get the rest of the story from Sheila, but at any time you can write in any of your contracts, and I didn't write it in because I thought it'd be a good exercise for us to go through every which way it turned out. But for your own peace of mind, you will be way better off if you can write in your contract, closing shall be done through your attorney, and put the name of your attorney in there. For the very reason that Sheila's just telling us. Okay, so go ahead, Sheila.
Okay, before I get to that, so is it true we can't use you as the closing attorney for both the buyer and the seller?
That is one of the new regulations.
Okay.
But we have ways around that, but you go ahead.
Okay, so I explained to him what I am doing, who I am. And of course, I know people that he knows, so I kind of like threw that in there, help sweeten it up.
Good.
So, because he was kind of, rough at the beginning until I started talking about people that we both knew. So tone change.
Smart.
And
Hometown girl.
I explained to him what I was trying to do. And I explained to him what that assignment contract is. And on it, it was the fee that she knows, that the buyer knows, as well as the seller, that is the wholesale fee in which I get along with my team. And from our conversation, he understood exactly what I was doing. And he needed the purchase contract. I sent that over to him, as well as the contact information for the sellers.
Perfect. Okay, so see what she said there? He needed the assignment contract and the original contract. Now, why? Now let's think about this. I can tell you a good reason, because I just tried to deal with the wholesaler in that Wilmington house I bought, which story I told you before. That dude had me sign an assignment contract, which I signed, and then he didn't want to give me his original contract. And I said, dude, how do I know this? I just signed a document that said I'm taking on all obligations of this contract. Now you're telling me it's $165,000, but how do I know if I don't see it? What if it's $500,000? I can't take on your 500. You know what I'm saying? So you're always going to send them the assignment fee and the contract. You can give that to your buyer. You can give that to their closing attorney. And then as for the question Sheila just asked, that's part of what we'll go over next week. It is a new regulation that you cannot represent the buyer and the seller. But here's what I do. You can still put in your contract that your buyer must use name of your closing attorney. And what I do when those come to me, then is I get another attorney to represent the seller. Now, it's not that I can't represent the buyer. It's that I can't represent the seller. So if you had put in there that they had to use us if I had put that in there, and again, I purposely didn't, because I wanted us to see firsthand of what it looks like to have to educate an attorney. What Sheila did a great job. I mean, Sheila educated that attorney, full stop. So if we had put in there that Russell and Associates would do the closing, then I would be doing the closing for the buyer. It's really good for you to have your attorney doing it, because there's no problem with you getting paid on that line, $5,000. What I do is then I have another attorney if the seller needs representation as well, which I'm guessing in your case they will. In this case they will. Our case. Then I have another attorney. I just pay $100 to, and he does the seller documents. So that's how we solve that problem. But that's for your future reference. Like I say, I wanted you all to see how it went, no matter which closing attorney they used. It is very common for a closing attorney who has no experience with investors to not understand and to be resistant. And you see what Sheila said there. Not only did she educate him, she had to soften him up. She had to, do some name dropping. You might not have that advantage. You might not be the hometown girl. So you might have a tougher job. Now, having said that, attorneys in bigger cities are it's chances are more likely that you'll get one who's a little more familiar. So, it depends on where you are and how you, but if you want to save yourself the trouble, always insert your closing attorney's fee in there for the buyer, and then let your closing attorney figure out what to do about the seller. They can get their own attorney. If the seller wants to be represented, we can find another attorney to do it. More on that next week. And so let's since we had tonight, let's not meet Friday, and then we'll meet next week, in which we might even have some more updates. But until then, Sheila, will you just put updates in the chat, like if we get a closing date or anything like that?
Right. He told me that the title search and everything is like they're behind. And so it will probably, it's looking like 20 days out.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, so we'll definitely have time for at least one more meeting before it closes, and at that time we'll go over these new closing regulations. We can go over this stuff again if you guys, if you've had a while to let it sink in, if you think about it and have more questions. And then we'll sort of take a little poll about what other things you want to learn before we button up this class. And then, after that closing, we'll conclude the class.
Quick
Okay.
question, Kathy.
All
So
right, sounds good.
will Sheila need any extension then?
Good question, Sheila. Do you need to go back and get an extension with your seller?
Or right, probably wait closer to the 14 days or 15 days? Because it sounds like she's gonna run out of time on the contract,
Right. Yeah.
but it might be a little premature to, kind of jolt them now.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
wait a little closer.
Yeah.
And I would
closer.
also keep on top of that closing attorney
Yeah.
and say, my seller is expecting this closing date. And
Yeah.
then when you get a little closer, just
Yeah.
go out and when you have a closing date, all you
Yeah.
have to do to get you can draft an extension, which I can do, or you can just take your contract, cross out the closing date, write in a new one, and have you and the seller initial it.
Initially.
Oh, you know what, Kathy? If you look at the contract, it doesn't have a date on it. Just says 37 days.
Oh, we got to get a date on there. So
Yeah.
don't ever do a contract without a date. It might
It-
not. Wait, are you talking about that's your buyer contract, right?
No. My offer to purchase contract with
Okay.
the sellers.
All right. Well, you know what? Let's get a date in there. Otherwise, you aren't going to have a valid contract at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Man, I should have caught that. I'm sorry.
Okay, so because it's 3 sellers, do I go back to all 3?
I would say as long as you have one of them initial it, that's going to be okay.
Okay,
If you want to be really safe, I'd have them all 3 do it. But if you don't anticipate any problems,
because I have a relationship with the main seller.
well, you can email it and have the other ones maybe initial it. Or you could just send an email and say, I agree to an extension date of blank and have them reply.
Okay,
Maybe that's what I would do.
So the email is, that's her, that's valid?
It is
Versus
in a circumstance with only one seller, I wouldn't want to do it. But if you have one seller physically initially and the other 2 responding by email, you'll be fine.
okay,
This because of this situation.
okay, so go back and get a date and have them to sign for an extension.
Yep. Well, you just need a date. You really,
Yeah. You probably need the date first.
Mhm.
just get a
Because
date.
I'm thinking, Kathy, asking for the extension this early might,
What I would do is get a closing date from the closing attorney.
yeah.
And then put that date in your contract with the seller and let them know that the closing attorney is going to be getting in touch with them because they're going to need seller information.
Okay, so how often should I reach out to the attorney?
Well, you really should only have to ask once. Just ask for a closing date. Just tell him I need to let my sellers know. Just tell him, since we're not going to close by the time of my seller contract, I need to get an extension. Can you give me a closing date?
Okay,
And then whenever he gives you that date, that's when I would contact the seller and get it in the contract and then you should be good.
Okay, so, and another question. Okay, this type of attorney, Duplin County is pretty laid back.
Hmm.
So, hopefully it will be no more than 20 days.
Well, I would tell him, look, but I got a seller with a closing date on it. You don't lose the contract for your buyer. I mean, look, when I know when that happens in our law firm, we'll expedite that. We'll make sure you close by that date. I'm sorry that he's not doing that as well. He should. But it is what it is. You can do a title search in, 1 day. Doesn't take no 20. So if your buyer has a real good relationship with him, you might get your buyer to put the pressure on him. Whatever you think is best, like how to work it. But
Yeah, I
bottom
was
line
thinking,
is, here's my date with my seller. If I can't close on this date, I'm gonna have to go back and get an extension. And if I can't, are you gonna be able to expedite this closing?
okay,
Ask it that way, and then just get a closing date from him, and then you can figure out how to approach the sellers. And again, feel free to put it in Slack, and we can all chime in and help.
okay.
One quick question, Kathy. I just want to clarify. So did you say one of the new rule is you cannot use the same closing attorney for buyer and seller now?
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'll post all those new guidelines, and it's not a law what they did. Instead, the legislature didn't even have to do it. They put new regulations on closing attorneys.
Wow.
So, why do you need a law if your attorney can't close it? I guess it's pretty effective. So we'll go over all those one by one. I am planning to do a meeting at some point about that, with Tria. So you'll have another opportunity to hear that. Trying to get another attorney to present with me. I think sometimes people get tired of hearing me talk, but yeah, they're pretty new. So
Wow. Are you gonna post that in the chat?
I will
I
post
mean,
them in the chat
or
before.
documents, I mean.
I will post those new regulations in the chat sometime before our meeting, not this Friday, but next Friday, and we will not
Okay.
meet this Friday.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thanks for being here, y'all. If you come up with any other questions or thoughts, stick them in the Slack.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope y'all have a great night. Reginald, you enjoy those kids.
All right, I got 2 more days with them.
Woo! Okay.
Thanks, Kathy.
All right. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.